Hello and welcome to my brand new vlog on leadership. You might say, well, who are you? And I think that's an excellent question. Hopefully you'll discover more and more about me as we go on our journey of discovery about leadership. I plan on sharing a lot of my experiences and things that I have learned along the way in every situation, through every relationship, in every moment. There's something to be learned about leading, not just leading others, but leading ourselves. And that's where I would like to begin our journey, on the subject that's most important about leadership, and that is the subject of learning how to lead ourselves. Leading ourselves. Jesus, one of the greatest leaders, actually the greatest leader, he said in Luke chapter 6, it really would be better for us to take the log out of our own eye before we jump in the cockpit of the airplane of another. Obviously, paraphrase. Take the log out of your own eye before you attempt to take the log out of someone else's. In other words, good leaders learn to lead themselves, and in leading themselves, they become the greatest advantage to those around them. So true. In some ways, I think leading ourselves is the easiest form of leadership. One of the challenges of leading is to get buy-in from those that you're leading. And in the subject of leading ourselves, think about it. You have the full control over your audience. Here's leading you. Shouldn't it be the easiest kind of leadership if we're guaranteed the most buy-in? Should be. It should be. But actually, leading ourselves is probably the hardest leadership that we'll ever do. Why is that? Well, the buck stops here. It's true in all leadership, but it's even more true when you're leading yourself. Because you are the one setting the agenda, you're the one agreeing to the agenda, and you're the one on the hook to perform the agenda. In other words, everything rises and falls on you. So dear ones, here's 4 things I'd like to encourage you to do to learn how to lead yourself better. The first thing I'd like to encourage you to do is learn how to humble yourself. 1 Peter 5 says, humble yourself in the sight of the Lord and he will exalt you in due time. Humility is one of those qualities that is a prerequisite for being a good leader. I know it's easy to look at TV programs and self-help motivational speakers, and we see how much swag they have as they carry themselves with this confident, I've got this, and boy, you need to follow me. But I want to suggest to you that humility is probably the greatest quality of a good leader. Jesus said you can either fall on the rock or have the rock fall on you. And dear ones, it's certainly better to have the rock not fall on you, but to yourself surrender and fall on the rock. If the rock falls on you, the rock, what's the rock? There's many things that are rocks in our lives, many meteors that are falling out of our skies. Sometimes we feel like the sky is falling, and things that could literally crush us. So the question is, do we want to be putting ourselves in a position where the things around us, circumstances of our lives, has the opportunity to crush us, or are we willing to lay ourselves on the rock and allow God, through those circumstances, to fashion the best version of us possible? Dear ones, I would suggest that great leaders learn how to do the falling on the rock rather than letting the rock fall on them. So learn to humble yourself. Jesus, when he began his ministry, he said we need to repent and turn to God because the kingdom is here. The best things in life, the best ways to lead others, it's not intuitive. The fall twisted us, and it twisted the things inside of us. As we dared to question God's motivation, we through Adam, we now have had our own motivations twisted to the place where it's difficult to tell right from wrong. The thoughts and intents of our heart, right, get so jumbled up. But with Jesus and the Word in us, we can learn to separate soul and spirit. We can learn to be better leaders. And that process requires us to live in humility before God. So humble yourself. Learn how to repent and repent often and repent easy. The second thing I want to suggest to you is know yourself. Jeremiah 1:5, right? You know the passage in Jeremiah. The Lord said, I knew you before I formed you in your mother's womb. Before you were born, I set you apart and appointed you as a prophet to the nations. We all have a destiny. We need to know who we are. We need to know who God created us to be. All those twists that I mentioned somehow cause us to get wrong versions of ourselves in our heads, and we think we're something that we're not. Our success lies squarely in our ability to lead ourselves on the right path to the right identity, the right identity, knowing who we are. In verse 10 of that same chapter, Jeremiah 1, God said to Jeremiah, "Today I appoint you to stand up against nations and kingdoms. Some you must uproot and tear down, destroy and overthrow. Others you must build and plant." We have a purpose and a destiny. We have an assignment. We need to know ourselves. To lead ourselves well is to know ourselves well, so that we can set ourselves to the right path and on the right course, not be driven by the tyranny of the urgent, but give ourselves to the purpose of our assignment. Leading ourselves well means knowing ourselves. Thirdly, leading ourselves means to build ourselves. We have to learn how to build ourselves. The Lord is gracious to us, and He leads us on a journey to help us be built in as we go along our journey, along our paths, built into the best version of ourselves. I really appreciate 1 Corinthians chapter 9, where Paul brings in this concept of running a race, and he said, "Don't you know that everyone that enters the race thinks they're going to win?" So his encouragement to us is that we need to learn how to run to win. How does a runner set himself to win a race? It takes hard work. It takes preparation. It takes training and effort, right? It takes a lot of sweat. It takes endurance. What are the things that you need to do to build yourself? I want to encourage you. Leading yourself well means that you set yourself about doing those things. And you understand that you have both weaknesses and strengths. And dear ones, I encourage you to work equally on both your weaknesses and your strengths. Learn how to overcome your weaknesses, the things that cause you to stumble. Learn how to maximize your strength. Learn how to build yourself. And lastly, I would suggest to you that as we learn how to humble ourselves, we know ourselves, and we learn how to build ourselves, I would suggest to you that we need to follow someone else. Notice how I switched it up there. We're humbling ourselves. We're knowing ourselves. We're building ourselves, but we need to follow someone else. Joshua had his Moses. Elisha had his Elijah. Timothy had his Paul. And even Jesus had his Father. I want you to think that thought. The wisest people I know learn how to lead themselves well. And invariably, it always includes this component of following someone else. Dear ones, I've said often that the trait, the skill that most of us do not learn intuitively or learn by our environment is perspective. It's a life skill that we're so lacking in. Learning how to gather perspective about ourselves. If we're not able to see ourselves accurately, which I would say to all of us, none of us are able by ourselves to see ourselves accurately. If we're not able to see ourselves accurately, how can we adjust? How can we learn to overcome our weakness? How do we learn how to maximize our strength, right? And following someone else gives us this luxury of perspective. Obviously, we need to choose well. Jesus said that you only have one Father, and that's Father in heaven. And we look at Jesus and in the life of Jesus, we understand that he was the best leader on the planet ever to live. He led so well, but the reason he led well is because he was probably the best follower. It says that he didn't do anything unless he saw his Father do it. He didn't say anything unless he heard his Father say it. I would suggest to you that Jesus was the best leader because he was the best follower. And that's how you and I are going to become the best leaders for others, is that we learn how to become the best follower. Paul said, "Follow me as I follow Christ." Dear ones, it's so important that you find a spiritual mother or father, or both. Find a mentor, find someone that you can be around that can give you the kind of perspective you need about yourself, so that you, as we finish this today, you can learn how to identify the log in your own eyes. It takes perspective to do that. To lead yourself well, you need to humble yourself. You need to know yourself. You need to build yourself. And lastly, you need to follow someone else. So dear ones, I want to welcome you to the journey as we discover what it means to be a good leader and learn leadership principles along the way that will propel you to be the best version of you that you can be. Thank you for joining me.